As much as we are formed by our faculties and our circumstances, our experiences and our families and our friends, we are ultimately formed, I think, by our desires. And that thought is shared by Billy Dean, the fatherless narrator and kind of chief hero of John Irving's 13th novel, In One Person. This is very much at the core of what this book is about. That and the way Billy was formed, he says, by how long I kept the secret of myself from the people I loved. In One Person, in so many ways, is the life story of Billy Dean, and it is essentially about him coming to terms with his bisexuality. In typical John Irving fashion, this book tracks its characters over a really long stretch of time. It begins in the 1950s when Billy is 12 or 13, I think, and it ends in 2010 when he's in his 60s. But Irving doesn't tell the story in a linear fashion. He jumps around through Billy's life throughout the entire novel. It wasn't necessarily done to enhance specific moments throughout the story as much as it was done to heighten the way memory works. At least that's my take on it. I think it really emphasized how our memories don't work in a straight line. Certain things in your life that lasted an hour, you can obsess about them for years. For most of us, years of our life are just like completely forgotten. In One Person is very much about these two things. It's about memory, and it's about perhaps the most unsettling of our memories, desire. And if I can further muddy this up and add a third thing to this list, it's also about understanding your story through the stories of other people. I'm a huge John Irving fan. The World According to Garp is just like the cradle of civilization for me in terms of American literature. It really transformed for me what modern literature could look like, could sound like, could feel like, what it could do to me inside. And there's so much of In One Person that reminds me of Garp. Both of these novels have really powerful literary threads moving through them. For In One Person, that takes the form of Great Expectations, which John Irving loves to lean on for parentless children in his stories, and the other is The Tempest by Shakespeare. The town in this story has a really enthusiastic local theater chapter, of which Billy's entire family is a part of. They normally stage things like Agatha Christie mysteries, but when a man named Richard Abbott becomes a teacher at Billy's school, he decides the best way to get kids to learn about Shakespeare is to act out Shakespeare. So they do The Tempest. And it's interesting to see Irving use the limits of performing a dramatic play at an all-boys school to force some of these kids to really confront and consider and deal with nuances and complexities in their sexualities. It's an all-boys school. There are female parts in this play and a lot of the plays that they do, so a lot of these boys are forced to play women. And for some of them, it brings up some feelings. At the same time, Billy is really influenced by the school's librarian, Miss Frost, who has kind of been banished there like a modern day Caliban, and Billy, kind of unbeknownst to him for a little while, is quickly falling in love with her. But what he doesn't realize for a big chunk of the novel is that Miss Frost is trans. And it's interesting to watch how things play out because all of the grown-ups around Billy know who Miss Frost is. They know her story, but nobody really wants to know. I think if John Irving is known for anything, if you really boil it down, it's the desires of his characters and maybe some of the uncertainties of the soul that come out as a result of these desires. That and Lost Fathers. He really, really loves the trope of Lost Fathers. He's exploring the fact that Billy never really had a father, and does that have any effect on his sexuality or how he expresses himself or things he's interested in or things he's trying to find? And I remember there was a review of In One Person that I read shortly after finishing this book that was describing desire as saying someone who has a desire for sex outside the missionary position is not about a sexual preference, it's about a psychic attitude. And I think that was such an interesting point to make when discussing this book, because Billy, obviously, some of the feelings that he's having are very physical and they're things he's born with, but it's also exploring like the psychological nature of sex and how that can actually change for you over time based on some of the things that happen to you. And I love that he doesn't really sugarcoat anything. Desire in this book is really messy, and desire really just kind of happens to you. You don't really have a choice in what you feel, and that's what leads us to desire people from different ages, from different classes, from different races, from different sexes. Desire in a lot of ways is really, or at least how Irving is painting it here, it's really defiant. It really stands in opposition of our expectations and our morality, our assumptions about who we are, and it really challenges them. And what I loved about this book is that Irving, I think, is so strongly arguing that this is a good thing. He also addresses the fact that a lot of our desires are things we never end up acting on. A lot of people, unfortunately, just suffer in silence for a really long time. What does that do to them? How does that change their life? How would their life have been different if they had acted versus not acting? And another thing that was really interesting, I think, is how he points out that the kind of self-knowledge required to understand a desire that you're not comfortable with, the kind of shock to the system that you feel, is the same usually whether you're acting on it or not. So desire in itself can just be such a powerful feeling whether it ends up going anywhere. It changes who you are. It changes how you act. It changes the trajectory of you. I wanted to talk about the very end of the novel, actually, which I usually don't like to do because of spoilers, but this is a novel's end that you can discuss really at any point, and it doesn't really spoil anything. The final line of this book could really be used as like the theme of the book. And at this time, Billy is in his 60s and he's talking to a younger man who's kind of accusing him of being weird or being not normal by being this bisexual man. And Billy replies to this guy, echoing something that Miss Frost says earlier in the novel. And he says, "Don't make me a category before you get to know me." And I think that's kind of the broad message that I would pitch someone who's wondering if they should read this book. If something like that, if a sentence like that interests you, if that is something that you're confronting in your life, if you don't think you necessarily fit into a category that people want to put you into, I think you would get a lot out of this book. It's a book that's hugely about tolerance, but not necessarily from the outside in. It's tolerance of who you are and how you feel and the desires that you have, and coming to terms with those things and accepting just what you are, which was lovely. And it was a message I really, really needed in my life at the time. So at the end of the day, I think In One Person is very much a love story, but it's about the kind of love that rarely travels in the direction that you or Billy really expect it to. So even though this book is 8 or 9 years old, I think at this point, if you're in the mood for a really classic John Irving story, if you're in the mood for a book that really looks at memory and desire and gender and sex in really interesting ways, a really romantic, beautiful, thoughtful book, I think you should pick this up. It's fantastic. As always, thank you so much for watching. My name is Rick, and I'll see you guys in a couple days. Bye.